So my name is Danielle Reid, and I'm currently the Chief Science Officer at the Monell Chemical Senses Center. I'm also a member. Now, I came to Monell in 1980 something, maybe 87, 88. And when I came here, I was a graduate student. And so I was very preoccupied with just my own project, which was studying how rats respond to different types of diets and looking at how energy metabolism works and why animals get fat or not. So those were very important questions, big questions, but I was solely focused on that. And then as I've gotten changed, I guess, and evolved and grown here, I've really taken advantage of the multidisciplinary aspects. And what that means is that there's a lot of different people doing a lot of different things here. And I've had the good fortune to work with many of them, and they've shaped how I think, how I reason, and what is possible for me to do. And so my science has changed because I've certainly learned to be more collaborative, to be broader in the questions that I've asked. And I've also changed in that I've really developed a love for helping other scientists achieve their dreams. And so one of the things I do here is just to do some basic stuff that people need to try to get equipment, resources, and to help people as generally as I can. So my origin story in science is I really had one of those classic bing moments. I was in college and I was majoring in economics, and I really liked the math of economics, but there's just something about it that was too hard to pin down. And I took a psychology, sort of like the type of psychology that has to do with biology. I took a class in that. So I signed up to work in their lab, and I had that bing moment of like, oh, this is where I belong. It's where I need to be. This just is just like duck to water. I mean, that's really the way I felt about it. So it was very clear immediately. And I was 19, honestly. And so I was really sure that this is what I wanted to do forever. And so then the next parts of this story are really logical. I applied to graduate school, and I got into a couple different graduate schools. And I had this one very aha moment. So I had the big bing moment of like, this is what I want to do. But what really changed the way I thought scientifically is I had this very distinct experience where I had gone to the laboratory of another person, and I had seen a mouse that was genetically obese. And what that means is that it was born with a mutation in its genes that inevitably it got to be very fat. And I was very impressed with this, and it really crystallized all of the things that I found so difficult to understand, which is why some and not others. And it was really a clear message to me that we can inherit things that really drive our whole lives. And it's really nothing to do with our behavior or anything other than our particular genotype. So once I saw that mouse, I was like, okay, yeah, this is what I want to study. And so I've been really in a variety of different ways and in a ton of different formats, really been pursuing how one little blip, one little change in a person's DNA can really radically shift what their experiences are, how they behave in the world, their health, all those things. So that's how I really sort of got from being a 19-year-old economics student to being a member of the Monell Center. What does Monell mean to me? Well, I'm a little biased, honestly. I really just have to say what my biases are, which is when I first came to Monell, I really fell in love with Monell because of it's not a family-like atmosphere. Like I have family, I know family, and it's not like a family, but there is a level of warm acceptance and a community spirit here that was so different to the university that I was enrolled in, that I really fell in love with Monell. And also, just to declare my biases, I also fell in love at Monell, in the sense that I did meet my husband, who was a scientist here, and we were doing experiments together, and I think the rest is history. So I have a deep love for Monell and a deep love for Monell scientists, including my husband. So there are 100 reasons why lay people should care. People out who are not scientists outside the walls of this building should care about what we do. But I'll just tell you about 3 of these reasons. So you may not know that one of the very first signs of dementia, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, is the loss of smell. Some people call the smell sort of the canary in the coal mine, and what that means, it's like the first sign of trouble. And so one of the things we do here is we learn how to smell, we learn how to measure smell well, and we are evangelizing the idea that everyone, and I use the word everyone on purpose, everyone should have their sense of smell tested. It's great to have it tested as a child. There's benefits to that. But certainly as we grow older, I think that it's to be frank, it's a cheap way to get a handle on who may or may not develop dementia. So I'm a little passionate about this because this touches my own life. So that's one excellent reason. The other reason that people should care outside of this building is that we do really important work on the regulation of appetite. So what does that mean? So I think we've all sort of, I don't know, probably everybody has walked into a room when you're hungry and you smell the good food and you get really hungry and maybe you eat more than you expected you would or thought you would. Or maybe you're the type of person that the thoughts of food are always with you and maybe weight is a struggle for you, or maybe you have obsessive thoughts even about food. And so one of the reasons that things we do here are important is we study the brain circuitry, what causes this food noise, these food thoughts. So that obviously has amazing implications. The third reason that people might care about what we do, about from the 100 reasons of the great things that we do, is we also study the sense of taste. And for any of you who have been in relationship to or love somebody who's had radiation or chemotherapy and has had their sense of taste affected, you know how devastating that can be. So people who are ill, they're ill and they're struggling to get better. And one of the ways that they can't do that is that they can't eat very well because their food tastes like cardboard, like straw. It's very difficult to eat. And so it's really important and interesting to us to understand how chemotherapy radiation affects the sense of taste, the actual cells on the tongue, and with the eye that maybe we might someday improve that. And I've told you 3 ways, the sort of 3 vignettes of why things we do are important, but there's many, many other stories like that here. I don't want to be like too grandiose here, but the reason that what I do is important is it really helps us have compassion for other people. So let me explain that. So one of the things that I do is I look to see how inherited differences, so things that you're born with, right, in your genes, influence your sense of taste. And what that can mean is that it drives what people like or don't like when it comes to food. Now, I think probably everybody has had the experience of providing food to somebody. You've cooked a dinner for somebody, you've taken them out for a meal, it's a family dinner, you made something special, all those circumstances, and the person doesn't like what you've prepared, right? So why is that? So many times, I think something's amazing and the next person next to me thinks it's terrible. And so one of the things I try very hard to understand is what are the origins of those person-to-person differences? And I think it's very important to understand why this is the case in many contexts. So it drives the kinds of foods that people make. So we sort of are always inclined to the lowest common denominator. I don't know about you, but I go to a million dinners where people serve pizza, right? Because it seems like the majority of people like pizza. And so when we're thinking about why individual people are different one from another, when we understand those deep and underlying differences, it helps us supply food to people in a more efficient way. One of the things I dream about is having what I call the genotype restaurant, whereas we looked at your genetic composition of your taste buds and we predict what you are going to love or not love to eat. So those are the type of questions that really interest me. So I'm thinking about who ultimately benefits from Monell research. And again, I don't necessarily want to be too grandiose here, but I would say everybody does. And it's interesting because on the wall of my office is a map of Africa. And one of the reasons for that is we were very interested in how people's sense of taste, when measured objectively, not what they like, but what they can actually experience, might differ around the world. And of course, we were focusing on people who were born in Africa. And we focus on people worldwide when we do some of our particular studies in my laboratory. So the research that we do pertains to all the people of the world. And this is a very interesting question to us, like how do all the people in the world, from a genetics point of view, differ or are the same? So that's one way that everybody in the world benefits from the research that we do. But the other way that people benefit is we study the basics, right? So if you crack open a textbook and you read some of the basic facts about taste and smell, these are the things that we've discovered here at Monell. And this type of knowledge, this type of expertise, the basic foundational knowledge about how it works is shared people worldwide now. One of the things we've seen with the development of the internet and all of the different information systems is if I do something and I learn something new, I discover a new gene, that information can be widely available in the classrooms worldwide. So that's another reason that what we do is very important here at Monell. So what's puzzling us, what's driving us, what's of paramount interest to us in my laboratory right now? So what we're focused on very strongly is understanding sweet preference and sweet liking. So you might just think about this like everybody likes sweet, and that's actually not true. And it's certainly not true that everybody likes the really high sweetness that we have in some food and beverages, at least in the US and even in other countries. And so we're really trying to dig down and understand whether variation in the basic receptors that transmit this information from tongue to brain, right? So when you experience sweet taste, you need to put something sweet in your mouth, sugar or some high potency artificial sweetener in your mouth, and that touches a receptor, and that receptor talks to the brain. And so one of the things we're interested in is the different performance of these receptors in people worldwide. And so we're really taking a good look at variation in this receptor and people's sense of taste worldwide to understand if there's a biological and inborn differences in sweet taste. And this is important because we see a lot of health recommendations to reduce sweetness down to very low levels, sugar intake to very low levels. And I wonder whether this is realistic for all the people in the world, right? Some people may find it quite easy to reduce their sugar to that amount, and it's no big problem, and they feel just fine. And other people, it might be much harder because they really, really are passionate about the sense of sweetness. And so this is a paramount question that we're working on right now in my laboratory. Monell has a very unusual environment because basically everybody here has their very distinct superpower. So in many institutions, you put all the biologists in one spot, all the chemists in one spot, all the physicists in one spot, and the physicists talk to physicists. But here, we all talk to each other, and we're able to identify each other's what I would call superpowers. So for instance, if I have a question about chemistry, I can walk down the hall and ask one of our chemists the answer to that question. It's an interesting thing because you can read all day long about something and try to educate yourself, but there is really no substitute to talking to an interested and caring colleague about not only the basic facts of what you're interested in doing, but having them give you the explanation practical knowledge and a larger explanation of it. So I would say everybody has their superpower, and it really, we function as a team much more so than any other place that I've ever been. And what I mean by that is like everybody brings these different superpowers into the environment, and we work together, but we each sort of have our own positions to play on the team, and I really appreciate that very much about Monell. I would also say, and if I'm honest, I would have to say Monell really follows the ethos that it's amazing what you can do if you don't really worry about who gets credit for what. And I really feel that with Monell, which is people contribute very generously with their time and their talent, and there's not a lot of, right, we're all human, right? There's egos everywhere. But honestly, we accomplish a lot because we do sort of function together as a unit. So I think that's what makes Monell's environment very special. So taste and smell research has really evolved enormously over time. And I hate to say there's one reason for that, but if I had to cite a very important reason, is one of the things that we learned early on, and we learned in some ways the hard way, and I'll tell you a little story about that in a minute, that taste and smell receptors, so these are the little molecules that sit in our tongue and noses, they do their work there just fine. They convey information from tongue and from brain to the nose to the brain and speak about the chemicals that we're encountering in our environment, right? That's the basis of taste and smell. But what we didn't understand and what we didn't know is that these particular little receptors that are in our tongue and our noses are in many other places in our body. And that's important for a variety of different ways. So the reason I said there's a little story attached is in the very early days when we thought that we had discovered one of the receptors on the tongue, right, that codes for a sweet perception, so it was like the sweet receptor, when we told other people about it and we showed that receptor was expressed in other parts of the body, people were like, well, you didn't find the receptor, right, because there's no reason for it to be anywhere else in the body. And it turns out, of course, that's not true. It functions just fine as a sweet receptor on the tongue, but it also functions everywhere else in the body and has different things that it does that's very important. And so that's one evolution of this field, is that we kind of went from being a niche, right, on the tongue and on the nose, and that was sort of a localized system, to being very important more globally in how the body senses chemicals and what it does with that information. So that's been an enormous shift for us in terms of how our research has evolved. It's really opened up a whole new frontier. I'm gonna cry. If I'm honest and I think deeply about what makes me the most proud, I would say I'm proud that I have still, after all these years, because I've been doing this for 40 years, longer, I still have as much curiosity today as I did when I was young. Like, I wake up every morning really excited to learn what's going on today. I always say, I hate to go to lunch because something exciting always happens. So I love that fact, and I'm proud of the fact that I'm curious, and I'm not only curious about what I do, but I'm curious about what other people here do, and in the wider scientific community. And that's followed very closely by my commitment to doing certain kinds of training for people. One of the things that happens is because science moves really fast, right? You have to learn stuff quickly, and it's not always stuff that you learned in school. That's a very common thing in science, which is there's a new discovery and nobody's an expert, but you need to learn fast. And so the other thing I'm proud about is creating opportunities for people to essentially learn as they go, and to provide a safe space for people to have that kind of training and education. And if I'm honest, I think that the thing I'm most proud about is just my own ability to have impact in the world. When I look at what my students have done and the great contributions that they're making, I feel very proud about that. What excites me most about the future are two things. One is that things are getting big now. So what I mean by that is that we have way more data, way more information, and way better tools to synthesize that information. So for instance, I really care about how a person's inborn genetics influences what they like to eat. Right? So my hope and dream is that I'll genotype everybody that goes to every grocery store in the whole world and understand what genotypes match to what foods, right? So we have that potential to make things really big. And the other thing I would say that really excites me about the things that are going on right now, and this is a little hard to talk about, but certainly to be honest, this last year has been very hard because scientists have been struggling to find funding for their work. And what excites me is the fact that science is something very enduring. We support each other. I feel very supported by the larger community, and I know that I don't know exactly how it's going to happen. Who knows how things will unfold, but I feel very excited by what the future brings. I'm confident that there's a way forward, and I look forward to being part of that. So, yeah.